This video is sponsored by Squarespace. So I had this roommate in college who was always getting top marks, like on every exam, every class. Everyone just wanted to study with him because he just knew all the answers. So if you missed a lecture or if you didn't understand something in class, that was okay. All you had to do was spend just one session with him and he'd just teach you everything. I had no idea how he was able to do this because he never studied. You'd never find him studying in his room or in the library or anything. And then one day I realized that he actually never studied by himself. The moment he showed up to the study group, he would just start teaching us. We all thought he was out here trying to be nice, helping us with our homework, answering all our questions, but in reality, his goal was to teach the information over and over until he understood it. He was just using us to sharpen his understanding, to gain more EXP. He was just farming us like wild Pokemon.
According to the science of memory, the first time you learn something, you tend to forget it very quickly, like within a day. But the next time you review it, you reinforced it, so it takes a little longer for you to forget. Then the next time you review, it takes even longer to forget. The question I always asked myself was, how many times do I need to review something for it to get to this stage, where it takes a really long time to forget it? This was the wrong question to ask. The real question is, how do I flatten this curve as soon as possible so that I don't need to review it multiple times? How do I make it so that right off the bat, it takes a long time to forget? And the answer is by using the teaching effect. Teaching is by far one of the best study techniques. If you look back at our learning matrix, teaching helps you solidify your understanding of the information so that you don't actually have to review it many times later. By the way, if you're not familiar with the Mike and Matty map, we'll be making a video all about it and linking it here. Or you could subscribe and be notified when we release it. But today's video is going to be dedicated to the teaching effect. We've basically covered why the teaching effect is so powerful. So now let's talk about the who, what, where, when, and how of teaching. If you can't teach something, then you really don't understand it.
Let's start with who. Who do you want to teach? Well, there are kind of three main groups to think about here. First, you want to teach children. This doesn't mean that you go out there and kidnap a bunch of 5-year-olds and force them to listen to you lecture. Teach as if you're speaking to a child. So don't complicate it and use simple language. And most importantly, understand the why. Children are always asking why. Why is the sky blue? Why is the grass green? Asking why is a powerful learning tool because it helps us break down the concepts into its more fundamental ideas. The next group you want to teach are adults, but specifically anyone outside of your field. So if I'm a doctor, I'll pretend to teach to non-medical people. This forces you to explain things thoroughly without relying on special terminology or jargon. So for example, I can't say, Mr. Chu, based on your troponins and your EKG, it would seem like you're having myocardial ischemia. That means nothing to them. I'd have to say, you're having a heart attack. The last group I like to think about are those who are disinterested in the topic. For example, I'm not a fan of calculus, but my calculus teacher taught it in such a way that it actually intrigued me. He told stories and gave real stakes and made it relevant for us. That's a good teacher who knows their topic. So if you can captivate an audience that was initially disinterested, then you've really internalized what you're teaching.
So what are you doing when you teach? Most people would imagine a professor speaking to a class of students. But teaching takes many forms. An expert can teach by writing a textbook. I can teach you by recording a video. The common theme here is that teaching requires you to process that information in your own words. You can try it right now. Go look at yourself in the mirror and teach something to yourself. First, try teaching it in your head, but do it quietly. Then try teaching again, but this time force yourself to say it out loud. You'll notice a difference. Speaking out loud actually forces you to process down to every word. The same goes for when you type out or write out by hand while you're trying to teach. It's slower, but it forces you to think carefully and pay attention to the details. The highest level experts in their field publish books. You can type out blog posts on what you're learning and share it online. Ever since we started teaching on YouTube and on our blog and newsletter, I've come to understand our medical and neuroscience topics to a whole new level. And speaking of which, our blog and newsletter are hosted by Squarespace, who are just awesome because they're also sponsoring this video. Squarespace helps you build your own website, whether you want it to be a blog and newsletter like ours, an online product store, or a way for you to share your art with the world. And staying with the theme of this video, if you really want to learn about something, you should create content about it. The highest level of understanding is when you're able to harness your knowledge in a creative way and build something new. Whether it's about photography or fitness or anime, Squarespace can help you share what you've learned. And you can also make a great portfolio if you ever want to find a job in that field. So head on over to squarespace.com/MikeandMatty, link in the description to get a special discount and start building your own home online today.
So next is where. Where can you teach? I mean, what are study groups for? I think the best time to form study groups is when you're still trying to understand the information. When I'm reviewing or using active recall, I think that's better done on your own, but when you're first trying to understand the information or learning it for the first time, I think getting together in study groups is really helpful. Teaching is just a great way to share your understanding, because maybe the way that the professor explained it in class didn't make any sense to you, but your classmate might explain it to you from a different perspective, and then all of a sudden it just clicks. So of course, the caveat here is that everyone in the study group must have some partial understanding of the topic first. We can't all be disinterested airhead Pikachu here, because then no one would be teaching anything. There are a lot of other places you can teach. For example, you can teach your friends and family at the dinner table, or you can go on the internet and teach people by writing a blog or making videos. So when you really understand a topic, you can teach it well. And when you teach it well, people will watch and engage with your video. And if that happens, the algorithm will favor it, and it becomes a strong feedback loop.
Next is when. When do you start teaching? As we mentioned before, teaching is best done during the understanding phase, which means you want to abuse the hell out of this strategy when you're learning new content. You also want to teach before you start making flashcards and before you start using spaced repetition. In fact, you'll have a lot less flashcards to review, and your flashcards are going to be way higher quality if you make them after you understand the information. But that isn't to say that you can't teach once you understand the information. You can really teach at any stage of learning. Leading professors in their field continue to teach at top schools because it helps them reinforce their research. It helps them apply their knowledge in new ways. That probably means nothing to you at this point, but let's just say that if you're all doing practice problems together to prepare for your exam, and you're able to teach your friends how to approach those problems and know the details of why there's a right and wrong, then you'll be well prepared for any curveball questions on the test.
Next is how. How do you teach? This is probably the most important section of the video, so buckle down, because we're going to talk about techniques and methods you can use to guide your teaching. So when I'm trying to learn something new, I'm trying to make sense of it. I'm trying to give it some sort of meaning. And the way that you do that is by relating it to something you already know. So a good teacher has already made these connections through years of training and experience. So good teachers are trying to convey their understanding of the info to a class of students who have no prior knowledge, which means a good teacher makes the information stick for students because they make it relevant enough so that the student gets it. So here are some techniques that you can use to make even the most complicated information relevant when you're teaching. And I'm going to start with the T tree. The T tree is something we developed ourselves. It's a way to help you organize all the topics that you've learned into a framework that's easier to understand. It's basically borrowing the structure of the table of contents or the curriculum of the class. Think of it like a simplified mind map. We actually have an entire video dedicated to this method that you can find right here. But once you've built your trees for a particular topic, it gives you a good starting point to teach from. You can start at the trunk and then teach your way up the tree to the branches and leaves and so on. Yeah, so definitely check out our other video for a more detailed walkthrough of how the T tree works, but for now, let's move on. Next is the whole part whole method. Remember, we're trying to make the information relevant to our students, but it can get really tricky when you're trying to explain something super complex. For example, if I'm trying to explain magnetic resonance imaging of the brain and how fluid attenuation works, most people would just tune out. Yawn City. There's no relevance there. It means nothing to them. So the whole part whole method starts by introducing the topic in the grand scheme of things. Like, why the hell does it even matter in the first place? And once they understand that, then you can touch on the finer details. So what I could do instead is start with the whole and explain how magnetic resonance imaging, also known as MRIs, are used to scan your brain to look for all sorts of different diseases, like infections, cancers, and strokes, and so on. So once I've anchored that relevance, then I can dive into the detailed science, or the part, about fluid attenuation and teach about how different diseases would light up on an MRI in different ways. Then I can tie it all back to the whole and explain the importance of the science and what situations you would consider using an MRI versus something else like a CT scan or something. So that was whole part whole. Big picture, little details, back to big picture. And the entire time you're trying to make it relevant for your student. Next is one of my favorites, and that is teaching with analogies. For topics that I know and love, like basketball, for example, the circuits in my brain for basketball are strongly connected from years of exposure. So when someone tells me that studying is just like basketball, it instantly clicks for me. Because the analogy goes, in basketball, the way you score points is you catch the ball and then you shoot the ball into the basket. So the same goes for studying. The way you score points on the test is you catch the info into your brain and then you shoot the info from your brain onto the test. Except not as it sounds. When I made this connection early in high school, I realized that I wasn't scoring a lot of points on my tests because I was spending all my time getting the info into my brain, reading it over and over, taking notes, that sort of stuff. But I was spending very little time practicing shooting the ball or doing practice problems. We have a couple videos drawing all sorts of analogies to studying, so if you're interested, I can link them in the description below. Okay, next is the Feynman technique. And the way it works is first you pick a topic and you start teaching it without relying on any notes, and you just teach it straight from your memory. Once you finish, you take a moment to reflect on your explanation. Did you forget things? Were some parts unclear? If you need to go back to your notes or your lectures for a refresher, then you go ahead and do that. But once you've filled in the gaps, repeat the explanation again, but then simplify it. And then keep reviewing and repeating this process over and over until you have a well-refined and succinct explanation. This is not easy and often requires many iterations, but the goal is to simplify complex topics into their most fundamental ideas. And finally, storytelling. There are many ways to tell a story, which I'm not going to cover in this video, but storytelling not only makes teaching more interesting, it also helps you remember. A good story with compelling characters, serious stakes, and emotional charge can really stick with you. I've never had to make flashcards and use spaced repetition to remember, I don't know, all the Avengers and all their backstories and superpowers. I just watch the movie once and I'm able to remember all the lore forever, effortlessly.
All right, that was a lot of info we just taught you. Not that it was for your benefit or anything. Obviously, I was just practicing my teaching skills. But now the question is, do you really understand what the hell we talked about today? Well, why don't you try teaching what we've learned in this video at the dinner table tonight? And while you're at it, tell your friends that Mike and Matty sent you. If you want to learn about more ways to solidify your understanding and to reduce the amount of time spent studying, then definitely check out this video right here.